Let's all do this together now. Go, me, and me, no. I said, wait a minute, so.
Hello. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Blacks for Gay Rights, as the title suggests. I feel that there's a natural association between the very core of African American identity that resonate well with contemporary gay rights. Of course, um, part of my own thinking about this and desire to talk about this has come from President Obama's recent announcement that as the first sitting American president, he is in support of gay rights. And I think that we can't take that out of the context of who else he says he is as an individual and as a leader. Um, he says that he is taking up the mantle of civil rights. And he's demonstrated this, of course. He demonstrated his at least willingness to have a dialogue about this on his very first day in office, where he talked about the void of civil rights surrounding Guantanamo Bay, but in the lives of the people who are there, but also the lives of us as a nation in our discussions about citizenship. Because we are starting to have those nativist discussions about revoking citizenship, about how we can treat citizens as combatants in war, all because of terrorism. Now, I know a lot of you will be looking at me and trying to work out in your own mind. Well, I'm a black person, so I must be for like civil rights, and kind of gung ho. People often have that kind of implicit assumption that if I'm a black person and I'm actually willing to talk about freedom, then that's even borderline radical. I accept that sits for many people in the back of their minds. Um, and so I have to accept that in their minds, I am radical, and what I'm about to say is pretty radical. Obama's support, however, I don't think is radical. He has been a supporter of gay rights probably for most of his life, but you see someone involved in the kind of social organizing that he did, where you actually have to confront people who are different from you, that kind of footpath um, activism that he did, and also placing himself in the classroom, I think are different ways that these are professions where the people who do that, they have to come to terms with difference. And it isn't enough to say that I'm over here and you're over there, but you're constantly looking for ways to reconcile with difference, because ultimately, for example, as a teacher, you're in a space of learning. So you have to, I think the best teachers, understand their teaching from the learner's perspective as a group, but also to be in touch, particularly, primary school teachers and high school teachers who have a lot of face time with students, more so than university teachers, that you have to understand not just what you want to fill into their head, but understand what their specific gaps are, kind of get a sense of what the hurdles to learning are. Um, and to do that, that's a practice of empathy. And I would say that teachers are a group of people who may hold their own personal beliefs, but they understand that in order to operate in the public space, we have to suspend our own biases. Now, obviously, this doesn't always happen, and this is one of the areas of how Black rights and gay rights help articulate civil rights in the public space, because I think that is the fight for blacks fight for civil rights gave us the language to articulate exactly this point of at what point are teachers able to leave their implicit bias and equally understand the perspective of the learners. You think of the Brown versus Board of Education case, and you even think of videos that are made now about dark-skinned children preferring white-skinned faces for all manner of goodness, association, friendship, kindness, nice, beautiful, and then equally holding a very negative view of themselves as the dark-skinned person, and looking at that as one side, if we as Black people can acknowledge that we have internalized racism, then certainly it it provides a roadmap for the larger, as I say, wider community to also examine its own internal biases. Now, of course, for many people that did happen. There even spawned out of that period many anti-racist organizations, even management leadership has evolved towards, in the business arena, has evolved towards anti-racism because culture keeps coming up as a modern commodity in the uh, knowledge economy. And so the struggle for civil rights has given us the language to talk about implicit biases from that perspective of a learner. Think that's a child going to school, but also to examine white privilege in the classroom and to even understand that the part of the privilege, part of white skin privilege, is obliviousness to privilege, um, which itself supports this kind of assimilationist mentality. Um, it we have studies now that actually show how teachers carry their own personal biases onto and project those in so far as their expectations of students, and so low expectations gets low performance and low results, and it's a self perpetuating cycle such that you will have high school students who are illiterate because they've been passed on, and there are even laws that allow for this kind of that legislate this implicit bias that if there are certain students who can't learn, you just push them on because, or maybe they're aging out of this learning group, but never really examining maybe they have special needs that can be attended to. But all these things, in a sense, weren't examined on so many individual levels. But then research wise, we civil rights has pushed us to look at this as a civil rights issue, to examine the role of teacher expectations in the classroom. Now, for those of us who grew up in African American communities, we may, I say many of us will have looked at that because for someone of my generation, our parents were the first to integrate schools. In fact, for this the so-called baby boomer generation that is so wide, vast, huge, and important to the American politics today, well, from the Black perspective, we also heard stories of those who transitioned from segregated schools to integrated schools and how they were the smart kids. They were the valued kids. Um, in, say, for example, even in my own city, a Louisville Colored Central High School. I even spoke to one of the supporting team members of the Brown versus Board of Education, um, the whole trial, the information gathering for that case. Lyman T. Johnson, and there's a school named after him, a prominent educator in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was telling me that the care that they were able to give to the community, to the students, came through seeing them as community members, as in having spaces of communion with them, going to the same churches, living in the same neighborhoods, but also that, there are people who were more highly educated, even people who had PhDs who were Black, were teaching high school. Um, for lack of university opportunities, but on the other hand, what's wrong with that? Not in the sense why is it a step down for a PhD, but look at how it enriched us. Look at the level of education that teachers have to have in Europe compared to America. So just think about that and look at the results. Um, but to even talk about this and to talk about that bias in the classroom, that's something that civil rights gave us. And that's also where gay rights picked up the mantle. Because now you think about bullying. It's it's a term that we only have for this time, this era. Before we sort of thought that bullying was a rite of passage in school, that you just learn the pecking order. Well, I think civil rights has given us the language to sort of question the pecking order, but gay rights has picked up what that actually means from the learner's perspective. Now, regardless of what you think about gay rights, and bullying is a gay right, anti-bullying is a gay right, um, I think that you would agree that bullying is bad. I think that most people viewing this video would agree that there are levels of bullying that and particularly the violence, but also the emotional violence, the terrorism that students no student should feel terrorized at school. That is not only inhibiting that individual's chances in life, but it reflects a pecking order to the other students. It keeps them in a narrow line, tells them to stay in place. So they're not. They also learn to, that's what terror does. It teaches everyone to stay in place. So it's not just the individual who's terrorized. It's just not the one who's lynched, but it's also the signal it sends to the other people. Black artists talk about from on the Chitlin circuit, the turn of the last century to the mid last century, talk about Northerners talking about going to the South for the first time, like Emmett Till did. And you saw what happened to him. And you hear them saying over and over and over again, they were just amazed at the level of terror that Black people felt that kept the white supremacy, in legislation and in place and in power. They kept that white supremacy, it was the sheer terror. And, in retaliation, the white supremacists, the open white supremacists knew. They targeted those who were rousers of rights, stirring up trouble, stirring up the hierarchy. And so we know that it's dangerous. And to see that, like, that's the example that I want to put forward is that, civil rights and gay rights, they feed off one another. They feed one another. They synergize because they both press us ever more forward. They don't compete. It's like climbing on a rung. And that's the meaning of solidarity. And that's something else that I think that we learned from the civil rights movement. If we didn't know it going in, we certainly understood in the thick of it that it wasn't that everyone was in line in the civil rights movement, literally just standing there. No, there was SNCC, there was NAACP, there were these different fashions, for example, younger people versus older people as a generational cohort, Northerners and Southerners who had a very different lived experience of their own blackness. Well, it was that energy, that diversity that synergized and kept the civil rights movement going forward. It wasn't just Martin Luther King's movement or just that he was a wonderful leader, but it was also the people around him or the people in satellite movements who said, "What about this? Add this, consider this," and it was basically all soldiers chipping away white supremacy on different fronts. And we managed to make great dents, more so than what Hillary Clinton said in her concessionary speech that um, her campaign was a crack in a crack in the ceiling, the glass ceiling. Well, I think the civil rights really did topple over um, significant aspects of white supremacy. Gay rights topples over, and it's continually, just even from the visibility, from Stonewall to the March on Washington in the 90s, to the debates today and the successes today, including Mr. Obama's support. Um, but that we're chipping away at patriarchy. When we talk about gays in the military, we're not just talking about the right of gay and lesbian people to serve. We're talking about the right of every soldier to have bodily integrity, and that's something that not even women have enjoyed in the military. So it's helping. We're both helping, supporting each other, and then you have the Occupy movement that's chipping away at capitalism. So you have this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. You have black civil rights or race, not just black. It's defeating this color line. On one hand, attacking racism. You have the queer community attacking patriarchy, not just gay rights, but the core of patriarchy. And you have the Occupy movement attacking capitalism. No better moment, no better chance do we as a world have, and that we're so deeply interconnected and interlinked through social media. This is it. This is our moment.